Value Impulses with Dr. Ulrich Vogel. Personnel Diagnostics Insights, Leadership, Assessments, and Personnel Development. A warm welcome, dear listeners, to the podcast Value Impulses Between the Years, which comes in two parts, today and here is part one. Between the years. So, what are the years? Of course, that's an astronomical unit that we have, just as naturally as a day on Earth. For 4.5 billion years, all of this has been turning, always the same, and the next day is sure to come. And the next orbit around the sun as well. And at some point, that also became a human observation. I'll say more about that in a moment, as opposed to animals or the biological program, which developed a certain feeling for the seasons, a certain practice in the value dimensions of heart and hand. That's when it's mating season. That's when you somehow have to eat enough to grow your winter coat. And so on. So, that's just how it went. And the human observation, that went a step further. I was once really impressed when I visited the pyramids of Güímar. That's a museum in Tenerife. It was inspired by Thor Heyerdahl, the Norwegian scientist, but also adventurer, who researched this all over the world. And at that spot, it was actually the case that at the position of the sun on the 21st June, right at the spot where the pyramid was built many years ago, the sun shone in exactly, and that's why it naturally gained religious significance as well. So, for the first time, a system was introduced here. And then, at some point, we came up with the calendar. But in the end, it's actually totally arbitrary, because nature really doesn't care whether it's the 31st. December, or the 1st, January, or the 13th of August, for that matter. But for us humans, who think and feel in such cycles, it's a turning point that invites us to reflect, hopefully in a critical way, on the one hand, and to look ahead. And since we humans are able to distance ourselves a bit more from our biological programming than animals can, we can abstract from what's happening in the present, recognize the principles behind it, and then make use of what's called teleology. That means we can set goals for ourselves, not theology, but teleology, from telos, the ancient Greek word, the goal. That means we can actually plan for the future and move forward purposefully, just as the name suggests. So, I think that's reason enough to take a moment between the years to reflect, to feel things out, and maybe even to work through some of it. And the first part of my podcast here, Between the Years, is about societal values. So, yeah, you could say, quo vadis, society. The second part is about politics. And yes, the current, perhaps uncultured way of engaging in debate, so, quo vadis, politics. Let's dive right into the first part, quo vadis, society. And yes, since our podcast is called Wordy Impulse, Value Impulses, I naturally have to ask, what are the most important values here? For starters, I've picked out the value of cohesion and closeness. Then the value of helpfulness, which I've already discussed in episode 72, titled Solidarity, but I also introduced the word helpfulness. And C. Today, I also want to include the concept of humility, or the value of humility. Let's start with cohesion, with closeness. Why is that so important to us? Between the years, when it's Christmas and the family comes together, it's not always harmonious. Of course, there's often a lot of arguing too, but it's a closeness that the family seeks. And at the same time, it creates a distance from everything else, I'll deliberately say from business, from the working world. And the question is, why is that actually the case? Why do we need that? And maybe, is that something we, as humans, always need? On the one hand, there's tension, and on the other, relaxation. Here, we also have the different, what do we call them, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. Maybe we actually need the distance to be able to reflect on things. And then, to be able to enjoy the closeness a bit more as well. And yes, Hartman once put it very well, business is definitely much more than just making money. It's more than making money. It's something deeply human because it also creates value. And that's why this sense of togetherness and closeness is perhaps also a reminder of what true collaboration is really all about. And that brings me to helpfulness as the second value during this time between the years. Why is it especially around Christmas? Why is it so popular? And maybe it's also because we come together like this and then. We notice how much we depend on each other. And especially in the family, it's like this. Friends, you get to know them, and the earlier you meet them, the better you know them. And at some point, it almost becomes intrinsic. Even if you haven't seen each other for many years, when you meet again, you pick up right where you left off. It's a bit different in the family. You're born into it, right? As siblings, for example, which is a bit of a different situation, at least for the younger ones, who, from the very beginning, don't know anything else but these similarly aged people around them. And of course, with parents, it's obvious how you're born into that. And this willingness to help is incredibly important too, being born as a baby, completely vulnerable but also full of potential. Around this time of year, it really hits home how much we depend on each other. And that really boils things down from other dependencies, which, of course, also exist in the working world, to what we experience around Christmas. Between the years, we feel these connections so closely and deeply, even on a micro level. And the third value I want to bring in is humility at this point. Why do we actually have it, and what role does it play? Probably originally, though I haven't researched this in detail, coming from the cosmos, meaning humility before what surrounds us and over which we have no control, and which, of course, can also come down upon us in great misfortune. So, we're talking about natural disasters, we're talking about illnesses, we're talking about famines and all these things. And yes, until quite recently, if you look at human history, we had nothing against that. Not the slightest means. And then, on top of that, there was war of our own making. So, I think humility is something really important that comes into play here. So, solidarity, closeness, helpfulness, I'd like to highlight humility. And yeah, the question is, why do we always end up arguing otherwise? Why is it that why do we so often forget these values outside of the holidays, which was also partly the topic of episode 72? Well, I mean, of course, we have two sides to human nature. We have a natural selfishness, which ultimately has to peak in the struggle for survival, in the survival instinct. And from that, of course, we also get distribution conflicts that arise automatically. Yeah, and you can, of course, regulate those in society with a certain pecking order, then we're in a system where people sort things out that way. Or, a bit more modern, a bit smarter, with a system of codetermination. So we need a counterbalance to egoism and the struggle for distribution, moving towards something that we can bring together as a whole society. Here again, Hartmann, who says, man is not a product of society. We're not the product of society, of social relationships, but ultimately a product of love, so, of man and woman in this case, given by nature. And what we have is, as he says, a lack of love, so, missing love. If we were more mindful of that, the world would naturally be a better place. And besides what love means as a feeling, of course, as a human value dimension, and pecking order or, even better, codetermination as a systemic one, there's also what we can achieve through practical solutions, so, the practical, extrinsic value dimension. Yes, and sometimes that can only happen through conflict and friction, in order to actually achieve the best solution. So, you could philosophize about this a bit longer and discuss what else could be done in society. I'd like to highlight volunteer work, the clubs and associations. To highlight them, so, beyond the official institutions, they're a kind of social glue that really holds things together. And unfortunately, it's on the decline in our society. So, if we're drawing a conclusion here, we have the micro level and the macro levels. And the micro level is, of course, the individual, but then first and foremost with the family, with those closest to us, with our best friends. And then, maybe as the next step, the small social unit, formerly the horde, and then onto larger groups. And these levels need to work together so that we can function as a society. And what's really important from my point of view is that there's always a give and take. Of course, we contribute through our jobs and through many other things we do as well. Hopefully, sometimes our job is even a calling. On the other hand, we rely on the benefits of other people's callings and professions. That I have a competent doctor who can save my life if I'm injured or sick. And this give and take, thinking of it like a pendulum, is a deep belief that I hold. There's the yin and yang in Chinese culture, of course, the opposites that interact with each other. And Peter Sloterdijk put it quite well recently in a podcast, saying that the Chinese did it better, because this dichotomy or this yin and yang continues on infinitely, so to speak, whereas Christianity is always ultimately working towards the apocalypse. But I don't want to get sidetracked now. Once again, the values of society, quo vadis, society, are what we should be reflecting on. Between the years, to embrace togetherness and closeness, and maybe even enjoy some distance from business, to live it out, to offer each other help, to show humility, and to set aside egoism and struggles over distribution. And yes, on the different levels, from myself to family, close friends, social groups, all the way up to society as a whole, we should reflect on these values. I believe that, between the years, we can take a lot away from this. Thank you for your time, for your valuable time that you invested in this episode. Thank you.